The thunder crashed like a gunshot across the Montana sky as Sarah Wilson clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the rain having already soaked through the thin fabric to her skin. Lost, alone, and miles from the nearest town, she had watched helplessly as her horse had thrown a shoe and then bolted, leaving her stranded on the open prairie as the storm rolled in with a vengeance. Sarah's teeth chattered uncontrollably as she trudged forward, the mud sucking at her boots with every step. The year was 1875, and the Western Territories were as unforgiving as they were beautiful. Having traveled west from Boston after her father's passing, she had been en route to her aunt's ranch outside of Helena when fate had cruelly intervened. "Miss? Miss?" A deep voice called out over the howling wind. Sarah turned, blinking through the curtain of rain to see a tall figure on horseback approaching. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. Stories of bandits and outlaws were all too common in these parts. But as the rider drew closer, she could make out the outline of a man with broad shoulders sitting atop a chestnut stallion. "You'll catch your death out here," the stranger said, pulling his horse to a stop beside her. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but Sarah could see concern in his eyes. Without another word, he removed his hat and leaned down, placing it gently on her head. The sudden shelter from the rain was a small miracle, and Sarah felt tears of gratitude welling in her eyes as water continued to stream down her face. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the muddy ground. He stood beside her, seemingly unbothered by the rain, now soaking his light brown hair. "Name's Lucas Steele," he said, offering a slight bow. "And you look like you could use some help, madam." "Sarah Wilson," she replied, her voice barely audible over the storm. "My horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back and ran off." Lucas nodded, surveying the bleak landscape. "There's an old line shack about half a mile east of here. Not much, but it's dry and there's likely some firewood." He gestured to his horse. "Samson here is strong enough to carry us both that far." Sarah hesitated, knowing that proper etiquette demanded she refuse such an offer from a stranger. But the biting cold and the distant rumble of thunder made the decision for her. "I would be most grateful, Mr. Steele." With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, Lucas helped Sarah onto the saddle before mounting behind her. She stiffened at the impropriety of their closeness, but as Lucas urged his horse forward and his arm came around her waist to steady her, she found herself leaning into the warmth of his chest. "Been ranching these parts long?" she asked, desperate to distract herself from both the storm and the unfamiliar intimacy. 5 years, Lucas replied, his breath warm against her ear. "Got tired of Texas. Too many people. Montana's still got room to breathe." As they rode, Sarah noticed the expert way he handled the reins, the quiet confidence in his posture. This was a man at home in the wilderness, someone who understood the brutal poetry of the frontier. True to his word, a small wooden structure soon appeared through the sheets of rain. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a stone chimney, but to Sarah, it looked like a palace. Lucas dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hands were strong and calloused as they encircled her waist, and for a moment as her feet touched the ground, they stood face to face, close enough that she could see the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Let me tend to Samson, and I'll be right in." Sarah nodded, still wearing his hat as she pushed open the creaking door. The interior was sparse but clean, a small table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove in the corner, and a narrow bed with a woolen blanket. A stack of firewood was piled neatly beside the stove. By the time Lucas entered, shaking the rain from his duster, Sarah had managed to start a small fire in the stove. "You're handy with a fire," he observed, hanging his duster on a peg by the door. "My father believed every woman should know how to survive," she replied, rubbing her hands together near the growing warmth. "Though I admit, I never expected to test those skills quite so dramatically." Lucas smiled, and Sarah noticed how it transformed his face, softening the hard angles and bringing a sparkle to his eyes. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Sarah said quietly. "He passed 6 months ago. I'm traveling to my aunt's ranch near Helena." Lucas nodded, pulling a tin of coffee from his saddlebag. "I know the area well. I can guide you there once the storm passes." As he set about brewing coffee, Sarah removed his hat and tried to smooth her dripping hair. I'm afraid I've ruined your hat, Mr. Steele. Lucas, he corrected, glancing over at her. And don't worry about the hat. It's seen worse. The small cabin gradually warmed as the fire grew stronger, and the rich aroma of coffee filled the air. Lucas poured the steaming liquid into 2 tin cups and handed one to Sarah. It's not fancy tea, but it'll warm you from the inside, he said. Sarah accepted the cup gratefully. I actually prefer coffee. Another habit my father instilled in me. Your father and I would have gotten along, Lucas replied with a smile. As the rain continued to pound on the roof, they sat together at the small table, the storm forcing an intimacy between 2 strangers that might have taken weeks to develop otherwise. Sarah found herself studying Lucas's face in the warm glow of the lantern. He had lit, the strong jaw covered with a day's growth of beard, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun, and the small scar that ran through his right eyebrow. How did you get that? She asked, gesturing to the scar. Lucas touched it absently. Bar fight in Dodge City. Before I decided to leave that life behind. And what life was that? He looked down at his coffee. One without purpose. I was drifting after the war, taking whatever work came my way, not all of it honest. He met her eyes. But Montana changed that. There's something about this land that demands your respect, makes you want to build something lasting. And have you? Built something lasting. Getting there, he replied. Got a small spread about 10 miles from here. Nothing fancy, but the cattle are healthy and the land is good. Sarah found herself drawn to the quiet pride in his voice. This was not a man who boasted or exaggerated. Lucas Steele stated facts as plainly as he saw them. And you, Miss Wilson? What brings a Boston lady to the Montana territory alone? Sarah traced the rim of her cup with her finger. After my father died, there wasn't much left for me in Boston. No family, few prospects. My Aunt Martha wrote that she needed help with her ranch, and I suppose I needed a fresh start. The West is good for fresh starts, Lucas said. Though it's not always kind to those who aren't prepared for its challenges. Like being caught in a thunderstorm without shelter? Sarah asked with a small smile. Lucas chuckled. Exactly like that. The conversation flowed easily between them as the hours passed, the storm showing no signs of abating. They shared stories of their pasts. Lucas spoke of growing up on a small farm in Kentucky before the war tore the country apart, and Sarah told him about her childhood in Boston, where her father had been a professor of literature. He sounds like he was a remarkable man, Lucas said as Sarah described her father's passion for teaching. He was, she replied, a familiar ache squeezing her heart. He would have loved this country, I think. The vastness of it, the honesty. Lucas nodded. There's no pretense out here. The land doesn't care who your family was or what clothes you wear. It only respects hard work and good judgment. As night fell, the practical matter of sleeping arrangements became impossible to ignore. Lucas cleared his throat. You take the bed, Miss Wilson. I'll be fine on the floor by the stove. Sarah, she corrected him. And I couldn't possibly take your bed. It's not mine, Lucas explained. This is a line shack shelter for cowboys working the range. And I insist. My mother would haunt me from her grave if I took a bed while a lady slept on the floor. Sarah relented, too exhausted to argue further. Lucas added more wood to the stove and laid his bedroll on the floor nearby. As Sarah settled onto the narrow bed, still wearing her damp dress but wrapped in the woolen blanket, she watched Lucas stretch out his tall frame on the floor. Thank you, she said softly. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Lucas turned his head to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light. Get some rest, Sarah. Tomorrow we'll find your horse and get you to your aunt's. Sarah awoke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of bacon frying. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, before the events of the previous day came rushing back. Lucas stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. Good morning, she said, quickly smoothing her hair and adjusting her rumpled dress. Lucas turned, a smile warming his features. Good morning. Hope you're hungry. Storm's passed, but the ground's still soaked. Thought we should eat before heading out. Sarah joined him at the table, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance but touched by the simple breakfast he had prepared: bacon, hardtack biscuits, and more of the strong coffee. I've been thinking, Lucas said as they ate. Your horse might have headed back to where you came from, or it could be anywhere by now. I'll take you to your aunt's place, and then help you look for it afterward." "You've already done so much," Sarah protested. "I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking," Lucas interrupted gently. "I'm offering. Besides, a lady shouldn't be riding alone in these parts. There are still some who don't respect the law." Sarah wanted to object, to prove she was capable of handling herself, but the practicality of his offer was undeniable. "Thank you," she said instead. "That's very kind." After breakfast, they set out together on Samson, Sarah once again seated in front of Lucas. The morning was clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. The prairie stretched out before them, a vast sea of grass glistening with raindrops that caught the sunlight like diamonds. "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured, taking in the expansive landscape. "Most beautiful country in the world," Lucas agreed, his voice filled with quiet pride. Harsh sometimes, but always honest. As they rode, Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area where the best fishing spots were, which ridges offered views all the way to the mountains, how the indigenous Blackfeet had once camped along these same creeks before being pushed further north. Sarah found herself hanging on his every word, not just for the information, but for the rich timbre of his voice and the obvious love he had for this wild country. There was something about Lucas Steele that made her feel safe and understood in a way she had rarely experienced, even with people she had known for years. By midday, they crested a hill that offered a view of a sprawling ranch in the valley below a main house, several outbuildings, and acres of fenced pasture where cattle grazed. "That's the Circle W," Lucas said. "Your aunt's place." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that she had finally reached her destination after the long journey from Boston, but disappointment that her time with Lucas was coming to an end. "You know my aunt?" she asked, surprised. "Everyone knows Martha Wilson," Lucas replied with a chuckle. "Toughest woman in the territory. She built that ranch from nothing after her husband died in '65. Most men wouldn't cross her, and those who do usually regret it." Sarah laughed. "That sounds like Aunt Martha." Her letters were always full of determination. As they approached the ranch, a woman emerged from the main house, tall and straight-backed despite her 60 years, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Martha Wilson shaded her eyes against the sun as she watched their approach, a shotgun resting casually in the crook of her arm. "That's far enough," she called when they were within earshot. "State your business." "Aunt Martha," Sarah called back. "It's me, Sarah." The older woman lowered her shotgun slightly. "Sarah, you're 3 days late, girl. I was about to send a search party." Lucas helped Sarah dismount, and she hurried forward to embrace her aunt, who returned the hug stiffly before holding her at arm's length for inspection. "You're half drowned," Martha observed bluntly. "And who's this?" She nodded toward Lucas, who stood respectfully beside his horse. "Lucas Steele, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Your niece lost her horse in yesterday's storm. I found her walking in the rain and offered assistance." Martha's eyes narrowed as she studied him. "Steele, you're the one who bought the old Peterson place, aren't you?" "Yes, madam." Martha nodded slowly. "Heard you've been building it up proper, not like that drunk Peterson. Well, come inside, both of you. Can't stand here all day." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, with well-made furniture and colorful quilts softening the practical frontier architecture. A young woman with braided blonde hair was setting the table for lunch. "This is Emma," Martha said by way of introduction. "She helps with the cooking and such. Emma, this is my niece Sarah from Boston, and Lucas Steele from the Peterson place." Emma bobbed a quick curtsy. "Pleased to meet you both." Lunch is almost ready. Over a meal of venison stew and fresh bread, Sarah recounted her journey and the events that had led to her meeting Lucas. Martha listened intently, her sharp eyes moving between her niece and the cowboy. "Seems I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Steele," Martha said when Sarah had finished. "The territory can be unforgiving to the unprepared." "No debt necessary, madam," Lucas replied. "I'd hope anyone would do the same." "They wouldn't," Martha stated flatly. "Most would ride on by or worse." She turned to Sarah. "As for your horse, I'll have my men keep an eye out." "What did it look like?" "A bay mare with a white star on her forehead," Sarah described. She's wearing a Boston-made saddle that would stand out here. I'll help search for her, Lucas offered. I know the area well. Martha gave him a shrewd look. That's neighborly of you, Mr. Steele. After lunch, Martha showed Sarah to her room, a small but comfortable space with a window overlooking the mountains in the distance. Get yourself cleaned up, Martha instructed. There are fresh clothes in the trunk. Your trunks from Boston arrived last week. Left alone, Sarah gratefully changed out of her still damp dress into a simple blue cotton dress she found in the trunk. As she braided her hair, she found herself wondering if Lucas would find the style becoming, then immediately chided herself for such thoughts. She had known the man barely a day. It was foolish to be so affected by him. When she returned downstairs, she found Lucas preparing to leave. You're going? She asked, unable to hide her disappointment. Got cattle that need tending, he explained. But I'll be back tomorrow to help search for your horse, if that's agreeable to Mrs. Wilson. Martha, who had been watching their interaction with interest, nodded. We'd appreciate the help, Mr. Steele. Perhaps you'd join us for supper tomorrow as well. I'd be honored, madam. Lucas turned to Sarah, his eyes warming as he took in her changed appearance. Until tomorrow, Miss Wilson. Sarah watched from the porch as he rode away, his straight-backed figure gradually disappearing into the landscape. Only when he was completely out of sight did she realize she was still holding his hat, which she had forgotten to return. He's a good man, Martha said, coming to stand beside her. One of the few in these parts who's exactly what he appears to be. Sarah clutched the hat to her chest. I barely know him, Aunt Martha. Sometimes a day tells you more about a person than a year, the older woman replied. Your uncle and I knew each other 3 days before we decided to marry. Lasted 20 years until the consumption took him. Sarah turned to her aunt in surprise. I never knew that. Martha's expression softened slightly. There's a lot you don't know about me, girl. But we've got time for that. Now come help me with the accounts. If you're going to learn this ranch business, might as well start today. The following days fell into a pattern. True to his word, Lucas returned the next day to help search for Sarah's horse. Though they didn't find the animal, the hours spent riding together across the rolling prairie allowed Sarah and Lucas to learn more about each other. Lucas was unfailingly respectful, always maintaining a proper distance when others were present, but Sarah couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed her, or how his hand lingered slightly when helping her mount. Each evening, Lucas would join them for supper, bringing small gifts, fresh trout from the creek, wild berries he had found growing on a south-facing slope. Once even a book of poetry he had purchased from a passing peddler because it reminded him of her father. Wordsworth, Sarah said, running her fingers over the leather binding. This was one of his favorites. The peddler said it was popular back east, Lucas replied, clearly pleased by her reaction. Thought you might be missing some of the comforts of Boston. Some, Sarah admitted. But I'm finding Montana has its own kind of poetry. 2 weeks after her arrival, Sarah's horse was found by one of Martha's ranch hands, grazing contentedly in a meadow 5 miles away. The saddle and Sarah's belongings were still intact, though somewhat weather-worn. Seems like your adventure has come full circle, Lucas said as they stood beside the recovered mare in the Circle W's corral. You have your horse back, you're settled with your aunt. Sarah heard the unspoken question in his voice. Yes, though I confess I've grown rather fond of riding with you, Mr. Steele. A smile touched his lips. Lucas, he reminded her gently. Lucas, she repeated, enjoying the way his name felt on her tongue. That evening after supper, Lucas asked Sarah if she would walk with him to see the sunset from the hill behind the main house. Martha gave her pointed look, but nodded her permission. As they reached the crest of the hill, the sky was ablaze with color-brilliant oranges and pinks streaking across the western horizon. The mountains in the distance turned purple in the fading light. I wanted to show you this, Lucas said, gesturing to the panoramic view. Some folks back east think there's nothing out here but dust and danger. But this. He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words to describe the majesty before them. It's breathtaking, Sarah supplied, genuinely moved by the beauty of the landscape and Lucas's evident love for it. They stood in comfortable silence as the colors deepened and the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. When Lucas finally spoke, his voice was hesitant, lacking its usual confidence. Sarah, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. Sarah's heart quickened. For me as well. Lucas turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. I'm not a wealthy man, and my ranch is modest compared to your aunt's. But it's growing, and I work hard. I guess what I'm trying to say is. He took a deep breath. I'd like to call on you properly, if you'd allow it. Sarah felt a smile spreading across her face. I would like that very much, Lucas. The relief and joy that washed over his features made Sarah's heart swell. Lucas reached for her hand, his touch gentle as he raised it to his lips. Thank you, he said simply. As they walked back to the house, their hands occasionally brushing, Sarah felt a sense of rightness that had eluded her in Boston. Perhaps her father had been wiser than he knew when he had encouraged her independence and taught her to value substance over appearance. Lucas Steele might not fit in a Boston drawing room, but here under the vast Montana sky, he embodied everything she had come to admire. Over the following months, Lucas called on Sarah regularly. Sometimes they rode together across the prairie, exploring hidden valleys and secluded creeks. Other times, he would join the Circle W hands for cattle work, impressing even the skeptical Martha with his skill and work ethic. Autumn came to the territory, painting the landscape in rich golds and reds. The air grew crisp, and morning frost decorated the grass like diamonds. The ranches buzzed with activity as they prepared for the coming winter. Hay was stacked, repairs were made, cattle were counted and moved to sheltered pastures. On a particularly fine October day, Lucas invited Sarah to visit his ranch. Martha raised an eyebrow but gave her permission, sending along one of her hands as a chaperone who tactfully remained at a distance. Lucas's pride in his modest spread was evident as he showed Sarah around the small but solid house he had built with his own hands, the barn with its half-dozen horses, the corral where he was training a spirited colt, the vegetable garden that had yielded a surprisingly abundant harvest. It's not much compared to what you're used to, he said as they stood on his porch, looking out over the property. It's wonderful, Sarah replied sincerely. You've built something real here, Lucas. He turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. I hope to build more, Sarah, with the right partner. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as Lucas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. With careful fingers, he unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. It was my mother's, he explained. She made me promise to give it only to a woman of substance, someone who understood that love isn't about grand gestures, but about standing together through whatever comes. He took her hand. Sarah Wilson, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, your strength, your kindness, your willingness to see the beauty in this hard country. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes as emotion welled up within her. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Lucas, I will. The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently in his hands. May I? He asked softly. Sarah nodded, her heart racing as Lucas leaned in and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and filled with promise. When they parted, his eyes were shining with an emotion that matched the one overflowing in her own heart. I love you, Lucas Steele, she said, the words feeling as natural as breathing. And I can't wait to build a life with you. Martha received the news of their engagement with less surprise than Sarah had expected. Saw it coming the moment he brought you in from the rain. The older woman said with a rare smile. He's a good man, Sarah. One of the best. Your father would approve. The wedding was set for December, before the worst of the winter weather made travel impossible. Martha insisted on hosting it at the Circle W, and to Sarah's surprise, her aunt threw herself into the preparations with unexpected enthusiasm. Never had a daughter to fuss over, Martha explained gruffly when Sarah commented on it. Might as well make the most of this. Word spread quickly through the scattered community, and offers of help poured in. The women from neighboring ranches contributed food and decorations, while the men promised to ensure the roads remained passable regardless of weather. As the wedding day approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led her to this moment. Had her horse not thrown a shoe, had the storm not rolled in when it did, had Lucas not happened to be riding that particular trail, any change in that chain of events would have led her to a different life entirely. The night before the wedding, unable to sleep, Sarah slipped downstairs to find Martha sitting alone by the fire, a glass of whiskey in her hand. Nervous? The older woman asked, gesturing for Sarah to join her. A little, Sarah admitted, settling into the chair opposite her aunt. Not about Lucas, but about everything. It's all happened so quickly. Martha studied her over the rim of her glass. You having doubts, girl? No, Sarah replied immediately. No doubts about Lucas. Just wondering if I'm ready to be a rancher's wife. If I'll be good at it. Martha chuckled, a rare sound that transformed her stern features. Nobody's good at it at first. I wasn't. Your mother wouldn't have been. But you learn, because you have to. She leaned forward, her expression growing serious. Your father sent you to me because he knew you had the strength for this life, Sarah. He saw in you what I see, a woman who doesn't break when the wind blows. Lucas sees it too. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. I miss him. I wish he could be here tomorrow. He is, Martha said simply. In you. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. This was your mother's. Your father sent it along with your things. Said you should have it on your wedding day. Sarah unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to reveal a delicate lace handkerchief with her mother's initials embroidered in the corner. Something old, Martha said, to carry with you tomorrow. Sarah clutched the handkerchief to her chest, overwhelmed by the connection to the mother she had barely known. Thank you, Aunt Martha, for everything. The older woman nodded, uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. Off to bed with you now. Can't have you looking tired on your wedding day. The morning of December 15th, 1875, dawned clear and cold, the landscape transformed by a light dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. From her window, Sarah could see people already arriving, riders appearing on the horizon, wagons making their way slowly up the lane to the ranch house. Emma helped her dress in the wedding gown that Martha had surprisingly produced, not new, but carefully altered from one of Sarah's Boston dresses, with lace trim added and the bodice reshaped to better suit the occasion. Her mother's handkerchief was tucked into her sleeve, and her hair was arranged in an elegant knot adorned with small white flowers that Emma had somehow preserved from the fall. You look beautiful, Miss Sarah, Emma said, stepping back to admire her work. Mr. Steele is a lucky man. I'm the lucky one, Sarah replied, smoothing the fabric of her dress nervously. A knock at the door announced Martha, who entered with uncharacteristic hesitation. She stopped short when she saw Sarah, a rare softness coming into her eyes. Well, she said after a moment. You'll do. From behind her back, she produced a small bouquet of evergreen sprigs tied with a white ribbon. Best I could manage this time of year. Sarah accepted the simple bouquet, deeply touched by her aunt's efforts. It's perfect. Martha cleared her throat. The preacher's ready. So is your young man. Been pacing the parlor for an hour like a caged mountain lion. Sarah laughed, picturing Lucas's nervous energy. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting. Martha offered her arm. Your father asked me to give you away, if the time came. I'd be honored to do so. Sarah took her aunt's arm, blinking back tears. The honor is mine, Aunt Martha. The main room of the ranch house had been transformed. The furniture had been pushed back against the walls to create a central aisle, and every available surface was decorated with pine boughs and candles. The room was packed with people, ranch hands, neighbors, even the shopkeeper from town and his wife. And at the end of the makeshift aisle stood Lucas, wearing a new black suit that made his shoulders look even broader than usual. His face, freshly shaved for the occasion, broke into a radiant smile when he saw her, and in that moment, all of Sarah's nervousness melted away. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. The traveling preacher spoke of commitment and partnership, of building a life together on the foundation of love and respect. Lucas's voice was steady as he repeated his vows, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. When it came time to exchange rings, he slipped his mother's pearl ring onto her finger, now complemented by a simple gold band he had purchased for the occasion. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared. Mr. Steele, you may kiss your bride. Lucas's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and the room erupted in cheers and applause. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Sarah felt a sense of belonging wash over her, not just to Lucas, but to this community, this land, this life she had chosen. The celebration that followed was joyous and lively. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household for miles around. A fiddler played lively tunes that had people clearing space for dancing. Whiskey flowed freely, toasts were offered, and Lucas hardly left Sarah's side, his hand finding hers again and again as if to reassure himself that she was really there, really his. As the evening wore on, Martha approached them during a quiet moment. "I have a wedding gift for you both," she said, handing Lucas an envelope. He opened it with curious fingers, then looked up in shock. "Mrs. Wilson, this is too generous. We can't possibly." "You can and you will," Martha interrupted firmly. "It's the deed to the north section of my property borders your land, Steele. Good pasture, has its own creek. Consider it Sarah's dowry." Sarah gasped. "Aunt Martha, that's nearly 1,000 acres. And what am I going to do with it?" Martha demanded. "I'm not getting any younger, and I've no children of my own. This ranch will be yours someday anyway, Sarah. Might as well give you a piece to start with." Lucas extended his hand to the older woman. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I promise we'll make good use of it." Martha shook his hand firmly. "See that you do? And for God's sake, call me Martha. We're family now." Later that night, as Lucas drove their wagon toward his ranch, now Sarah leaned against his shoulder, watching the stars overhead in the clear winter sky. "Happy, Mrs. Steele?" Lucas asked, his arm tightening around her. "Completely," Sarah replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "Though I still can't believe how all of this happened. If you hadn't found me in that storm." Lucas brought the wagon to a stop on a rise overlooking their property. In the moonlight, Sarah could make out the silhouette of the house, smoke still rising from the chimney where Lucas had asked one of the hands to start a fire earlier. "I believe some things are meant to be," he said, turning to face her. "From the moment I saw you standing there in the rain, something told me my life was about to change." "Mine too," Sarah whispered. "I just didn't know it yet." Lucas helped her down from the wagon, but instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her into his arms. "Tradition says I should carry you across the threshold," he explained with a smile. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart full to bursting. "Far be it from me to argue with tradition, Mr. Steele." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Lucas had prepared it carefully for her arrival. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed, and wildflowers dried from the fall season sat in a vase on the table. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was theirs, and to Sarah, it was perfect. "Welcome home," Lucas said softly, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Home," Sarah repeated, leaning into his embrace. "I like the sound of that." Spring came early to Montana that year. By March, the snow was melting, revealing tender green shoots pushing up through the soil. On the expanded Steele Ranch, new life was everywhere, calves frolicking in the pastures, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, and most precious of all, the new life growing within Sarah herself. She shared the news with Lucas one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. His reaction, pure joy followed by tender concern for her well-being, only confirmed what Sarah already knew. Lucas would be an exceptional father. Word spread quickly through the community, and Martha rode over the very next day, ostensibly to discuss cattle matters, but really to fuss over Sarah in her own gruff way. "You're eating enough? Getting rest? Not letting this husband of yours work you too hard?" she demanded, eyeing Sarah critically. "I'm being well cared for, Aunt Martha," Sarah assured her, exchanging an amused glance with Lucas. "In fact, Lucas hardly lets me lift a finger these days." "Good," Martha nodded approvingly. "Babies born in the territory need strong mothers. This one will be half Wilson, half Steele, might be the toughest child Montana's ever seen." As summer approached, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Lucas's hard work and knowledge of cattle, combined with Sarah's organizational skills and the additional land from Martha, had transformed their modest spread into a promising operation. They had hired 2 hands to help with the increased workload, and the barn now housed twice as many horses as when Sarah had first arrived. On hot afternoons, when the work allowed, Lucas would insist that Sarah rest. Sometimes they would ride together to a shaded spot by the creek that ran through their property, where Lucas would read aloud from one of Sarah's books while she rested her head in his lap, his free hand often resting protectively on her growing belly. "What shall we name him?" Lucas asked one day as they lounged by the water. "Him?" Sarah questioned with a smile. "So certain it's a boy." Lucas shrugged, a slight blush coloring his tanned cheeks. "Just a feeling. Though a little girl with your eyes would be the greatest blessing I could imagine." "If it's a boy," Sarah said thoughtfully, "I'd like to name him after my father. Thomas." "Thomas Steele." Lucas tested the name. "It's a good, strong name." "And if it's a girl," Sarah continued, "perhaps we could name her after your mother?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, his eyes growing misty. "Elizabeth," he finally said. "Her name was Elizabeth." "Elizabeth Steele," Sarah smiled. "Equally beautiful." As Sarah's time grew closer, Martha insisted she come stay at the Circle W, where the more experienced Emma could help with the birth. Lucas was reluctant to be parted from her, but agreed it was the safest option, given that the nearest doctor was in Helena, nearly a day's ride away. "I'll visit every day," he promised as he helped her settle into her old room at her aunt's ranch. "And at the first sign, send someone for me immediately." "You'd think no woman had ever had a baby before," Martha commented dryly after Lucas had departed, casting worried glances over his shoulder. "He worries," Sarah said simply. Martha's expression softened. "That's what makes him a good man." The baby, a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha Steele, arrived on a warm night in late August after a labor that left Sarah exhausted but triumphant. When Lucas was finally allowed into the room, his face a mask of worry that dissolved into wonder at the sight of his wife holding their child, Sarah felt her heart might burst with happiness. "She's perfect," Lucas whispered, perching carefully on the edge of the bed and extending a tentative finger that the baby immediately grasped with surprising strength. "Look at that, she's got a grip like her great Aunt Martha already." Sarah laughed weakly. "Don't tell Aunt Martha you said that." "Don't tell Aunt Martha what?" came Martha's voice from the doorway, where she stood with an uncharacteristically tender expression as she gazed at the new family. "That she takes after you," Lucas replied boldly. To their surprise, Martha smiled. "Could do worse for a role model," she said, approaching the bed to get a better look at her great-niece. "Elizabeth Martha, is it?" Sarah nodded. "If that's all right with you." Martha blinked rapidly, turning away to hide the emotion on her face. "It'll do," she said gruffly. "It'll do just fine." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The harsh winter of 1878 threatened their cattle herd, but Lucas's foresight in storing extra hay saw them through with minimal losses. The following summer, drought parched the land, but the creek on the property Martha had given them never ran dry, allowing them to irrigate enough pasture to maintain their core breeding stock. Elizabeth, or Libby, as she came to be called, grew into a spirited child with her father's quiet strength and her mother's quick mind. She was joined by a brother, Thomas, in the spring of 1879, and the Steele home rang with children's laughter. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, though she gradually ceded more control of the Circle W to Sarah and Lucas as her health began to fail. By the time Sarah was expecting their third child in 1882, it was clear that Martha's fierce spirit was finally beginning to dim. "Promise me something," Martha said to Sarah one afternoon as they sat on the Circle W porch, watching Lucas teach Libby to ride her first pony while Thomas toddled after them. "Anything," Sarah replied, concerned by the unusual vulnerability in her aunt's voice. "Promise me you'll keep this land together. Both ranches. Promise me you'll pass it on to your children and teach them to love it as we do." Sarah took her aunt's weathered hand in hers. "I promise, Aunt Martha. This land is our legacy." Martha nodded, satisfied. "You've done well, girl. Better than I expected when you first arrived, looking like a half-drowned kitten in that storm." Sarah smiled at the memory. "I was terrified that day. Lost, cold, certain I'd made a terrible mistake coming west. And now," Sarah's gaze drifted to Lucas, who had dismounted to adjust Libby's stirrups, his hands gentle and patient as he explained something to his enraptured daughter. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made." Martha passed peacefully in her sleep that winter, leaving the Circle W to Sarah and Lucas, as everyone had expected. They decided to maintain both homesteads, living primarily at their original ranch while using the Circle W for expanded operations. The combined property made them one of the largest landowners in the area, a responsibility they took seriously. Their third child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in the spring, bringing new joy to temper the sadness of Martha's passing. As the years flowed by, the Steele family prospered, weathering the ups and downs of ranching life with the same determination and partnership that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On a warm autumn evening in 1895, 20 years after they had first met, Lucas and Sarah sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their eldest, Libby, was now teaching at the school that had been built in the growing town nearby. Thomas, 17, and the image of his father, had taken over much of the daily ranch operations. Grace, 13, was inside practicing the piano that Lucas had arranged to have shipped all the way from Chicago as a surprise for Sarah's 40th birthday. "Do you ever think about that day?" Lucas asked, his hand finding Sarah's as it had countless times over the years. Though his hair was now streaked with silver and lines of experience marked his face, his eyes still held the same warmth when they looked at her. "Which day?" Sarah asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "The day I found you shivering in the rain," he replied with a smile. "When I covered you with my hat and stood beside you, not knowing I was looking at my future." Sarah squeezed his hand, her heart still skipping a beat at his touch even after all these years. "I think about it often. How different everything would have been if you hadn't come along that trail at that exact moment." Lucas brought her hand to his lips. "I've thanked God every day since for sending that storm." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the life they had built together. From that first meeting in the rain to this moment, their journey had been one of partnership and deep love, weathering storms both literal and figurative side by side. "I love you, Lucas Steele," she said softly, the words no less true for having been said thousands of times before. "And I love you, Sarah Steele," he replied, his arm tightening around her as the last rays of the setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and promise. "Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we have left." Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, their hands intertwined, their hearts still beating as one just as they had since that fateful day when a lost Boston woman and a Montana cowboy found each other in the rain.